This is a remake of a video I made 2 months ago in Chinese. The topic of this video is the wisdom to deal with personal differences. It came from the inspiration that U.S. is we're living in U.S. and right now U.S. is more split than ever. The left think they are being shortchanged, and the right also think they are being shortchanged. And even within families, there are all kinds of various fights and divorces and so on and so forth. So, but I Ching itself actually has a hexagram that specifically deal with this situation. It's hexagram 38, mending personal differences. Let's see what hexagram 38 says. Differences produce separations and vice versa. Mending differences should start from focusing on small matters, then it shall be auspicious. Differences exist between heaven and earth, men and women, among everything. Yet we can always find commonality from our larger perspectives. Okay, so let's dive right in to the detail. So again, we refer back to our quantized I Ching, and we quantize auspiciousness value, ending value, and also the slope. The higher the number, the more auspicious the subject feels as he or she is going through this particular hexagram experience. Slope means that within that particular experience, like within line 1, if you are going from misfortune to auspicious, then the slope is positive, and vice versa. If it's negative, it's from a auspicious state into the misfortune state. So here are the overall 6 lines, but let's look at what they are. So on line 1, basically, is a phase 1 of mending the differences. Is the main theme is the difference start to surface, but it's not time to resolve it yet. When you get to line 2, it's best to attempt to reconcile through a third party. By the time you reach phase 3 of Hex 38, the splitting has become so severe, it exacerbates to a point where either side, if they say anything, it seems wrong. By the time you reach phase 4, that's after a long time from the beginning of phase 3, both sides will feel the isolation and separation start to generate loneliness feeling, and splitting did not benefit anybody. So the loneliness will lead to dialogue on phase 4. By phase 5, the dialogue has taken place, but the topic of dialogues has broadened, so many old wounds will be opened up, so it feels a little bit painful. But yet, both 4 and 5, let's look at that, the ending is auspicious. That means even the conversation is taking place, but there's a lot of big heart involved in in conducting these dialogue. So if you can go through phase 4 and phase 5, the ending is very auspicious. And in phase 6, the end game for mending the differences is not that everybody united together and then form a united position. No. By phase 6 of hexagram 38, both sides acknowledge differences are permanent. Both sides agree to recognize the difference and complement when possible. And that's the end game result. So mending the difference is never intended to unite the viewpoint or unite the perspective. So let's put those things in words and dive a little bit further. So I put those pictorial description into words. The phase 1 is different surface. Phase 2, reconcile through third party. Phase 3, splitting got pretty bad, so nobody's talking to each other. Phase 4, okay, it got lonely, so let's start dialogue. Phase 5, the dialogue broadened, but the old wounds got opened up. And finally, phase 6, as I said, the end game is both sides recognize the differences and then just decide to coexist. But there's some issue with going through this entire hexagram 38. One challenge is that on hexagram 38 line 3, let's look at that, it's very negative. negative 8.14. We mentioned the standard deviation for our quantized I Ching every line is around 6. So we're already over one standard deviation toward the misfortune. So whoever is in that particular phase 3 will feel very frustrated and awkward. So line 3 is very hard to endure. Whatever is said by either side seems to be worsening the situation. No one can convince one another. So that is a tough challenge. So when that happens, this line 3 right here, look at that. These are yin energies where you can only beat around bush. You cannot tackle the issue head on because nobody can convince each other, and that's stalemate. Just continue on phase 3. Also, another challenge happened in phase 4. Even though phase 4, the end result, look at this, is very auspicious. If you can conduct that dialogue after the long time of loneliness. But it takes a long time for both sides to really feel lonely. So there's a big time delay from beginning phase 3 to really let the phase 4 happen. So during these two phases of the hexagram 38, the subject is very susceptible to do certain thing by his or her own free will. And if he or she decide to do that, it will change the nature of a hexagram. Let's see how this is done. So at the line 3, you are supposed to just, hey, let's just separate, don't talk to each other. But hexagram 38 line 3 is so hard to endure because one side may feel, man, it's obviously the other side is wrong. Why couldn't he admit his mistake? So there's a huge temptation that, hey, let's just bring everything onto the surface. Let's talk it out. Let's fight it out. And you can see, originally, to go through the mending the difference, you are supposed to beat around the bushes at this particular phase. Don't confront. But if you decide, okay, I'm going to confront, I'm going to just bring everything out on the surface of the table, let's resolve it now. Unfortunately, that's not the right time to do that yet. Nevertheless, you choose to do that. So instead of avoid the contact, the subject decide to confront and take vengeance on the other side. But obviously, you are changing the energy from yin energy into the yang energy, which we are mentioned in our earlier video. Then when you change that, you are basically exerting energy to the center of the issue. So you are bringing everything on the table. So when that happens, this hexagram is no longer hexagram 38, it's hexagram 14. Hexagram 14 is titled Handling and Retaining Wealth. It's very interesting. You jump to line 3 of hexagram 14. Look at that. Before it was very hard to endure, now it's getting even harder. Because on phase 3 of hexagram 14, subjects are expending valuable resources, and such expenditure looks inappropriate and unreasonable to the outsider. So line 3 will incur large expenditures. In order to reach phase 5 or phase 6, however, on hex 14, the subject must adhere to the righteousness to sustain. If you are unrighteous to start with, you will never even get to phase 5, phase 6, and you will expend your resources, just keep expending right here, and which we'll mention in the later summary chart. Well, can you think of some example of separation causing unreasonable resource expenditures? Well, how about these two couples? How about their wealth? What's the impact on their wealth? And what's the tax implication when they do that? So that's a typical example of when you decide to confront, hey, you're going to lose a lot. And to the outsider, people think, man, that's very reasonable. You guys could have worked together and take over the world or something. So that's what it means when we have large expenditure, even though you are from a retaining wealth. You have a wealth, but you are expending a lot of your existing resources. Another situation we mentioned earlier was that line 4. Hex 38 line 4 involves into re-engagement after sustained separation. So the key thing that triggered this Line 4 is that both sides, after a long time of separation, feels lonely, so they decide, okay, let's start a dialogue sincerely. But at this time, look at that, the line on the Hex 38 is a yang line. The yang line energy should exert the energy at the center of the matter. But there is a tendency for some people, when they get to line 4 of Hex 38, feel like, hey, I like the loneliness. I want to keep such separation. Can they do that? Yes, they can. When they do that, they also change the nature of Hex 38. They are no longer experiencing Hex 38, the mending the difference. They are experiencing Hex 41. Because originally I was supposed to talk it out, but now I keep the separation. I keep venturing my own way. And I use a picture of solitude meditation there. By subject's conscious choice, the experience of line 38 now becomes the experience of line 41. So let's look at line 41 at phase 4, what it says. Leading righteous endeavor, eradicate own shortcoming, shall receive more resources. So it's interesting that if you do change your hexagram to line 41, it's not that bad. It's not like line 14. You immediately suffer a great loss. Here it actually said if you continue to eradicate your own shortcoming, then you'll receive more resources right here. So you can see the auspiciousness score here on line 4 is pretty high if you execute hexagram 41. But the line 4 on hex 41 requires eradicating own shortcomings. That's not an easy task to do. You have to correct your mistake. You eradicate your shortcoming in order to go through the line 5 and line 6, where you will get even more auspicious results at the end game. So I can summarize the wisdom for mending the difference in such a flow chart. So when the difference starts to surface, we first try to reconcile through a third party at the right opportunity. If that differences are reconciled, then it's the end. There's no more hex 38. You are done. You finish. All the differences are gone. But if you cannot, the differences get worse and nothing seems to work anymore. So at this time, you have two choices. You can openly confront the adversary party, and then you will endure expenditure that looks unreasonable to the outsider. That's what we talked about on the hex 14. But if you avoid confrontation, just everybody go their own way, you will get into the phase 4 of hex 38, where you'll start to feel lonely and supposedly dialogue will start. So let's look at this hex 14 branch. Hex 14, as you confront everybody, confront the adversary party, there is one very critical action you have to do. You have to discern shame from reality, which means you have to stand on the righteousness ground. You cannot assume that you are righteous without any particular reason that's based on certain righteousness principles. If you can discern right from wrong, then you can move to phase 5. But if you cannot, if you already spend a lot of unreasonable resources and yet you still cannot discern shame from reality, you will actually be caught in this loop. You will not go into phase 5. You will just keep going on here, and then you will keep expending. Your expenditure keep piling up because you cannot get out of this loop, because you yourself is unrighteous. There's no way you can move on to phase 5. Suppose you did get out of that loop, you can discern right from wrong. Sometimes you have to go through a couple times to really bump your head before you realize what's right and what's wrong. When you get to phase 5, resources are protected. People rely on trust. Be humble. No need to be defensive. Then you'll get to the much better aspect of the hex 14. And finally, if you sustain phase 5 for a period of time, you will maintain the righteousness and you will receive more blessing and with no obstructions inside. And that's a very good end game. Okay, let's move back here. As from Hex 38, you decided, oh, I'm not going to talk to each other. I'm just going to keep my solitude, keep isolating. We don't need to talk. That's fine. If you do that, you keep the distance, but you have to eradicate your shortcoming. If you do not eradicate your shortcoming, you will also be stuck here at Hex 41, line 4. You'll be stuck here and you cannot receive the goodness from the further endgame of Hex 41. So here, if you can eradicate your shortcoming, there will be people who recognize your effort and recognize your work, and you will receive more resources from other places or other influential individuals. Basically, you start a new life, from if you choose on this path. And finally, the end game for Hex 41 is you don't need to expend any of your own resources. You can leverage a lot of these external synergy and to increase your influences from many aspects. So let's summarize in our conclusion. So what is the wisdom to deal with the differences? Well, the first item is that after differences surface, don't solve it right away. It's not the right time. At the right moment, try to end the differences by reconciling through a third party. If that difference cannot be resolved through third party, you will get into a phase where the differences seem too large to overcome. Whatever is said on either side seems to worsen the situation. Then the subject has the following choices of action. The first choice is confront head-on, but if you choose this path, you must stand on the righteous high ground to reach desirable endgame, and that's what we talk about here. If you choose this path, you must discern shame from reality in order to reach the receiving blessing, the very good endgame on Hex 14. Another path you can do is avoid contact, just avoid dialogue, just avoid. So we can just avoid confrontation and move into phase 4 of the Hex 38. If you choose to avoid the contact and dialogue on phase 3 of the Hexagram 38, there are 2 routes you can take. That's what we talk about. That's what we showed here. If you choose to avoid confrontation on phase 3 after a long time, you can either feel lonely, and then we conduct a sincere dialogue for both sides, and such dialogue leading to acknowledgement and acceptance of the coexistence. And that's the end game of the mending difference, Hex 38. Both sides accept differences and decide to complement each other. But there's another path. If you keep the avoidance, subject will focus on his own shortcoming to achieve a desirable end game, and that's what we talk about here in Hex 41, where you finally, at the end game, is that you pretty much have a new life and you can leverage external synergies and without expending any of your own resources, and then still reach good influence to influence the people around you and the society into a righteous future.